Some content or topics discussed could trigger a past anxiety or be sensitive or disturbing to listen to or view. Please view and listen with caution. Hi, my name is Todd Blyleven. I'm one of the hosts of the Walking Tall podcast, and it's our mission to help all people that are down and depressed or dealing with some sort of trauma or mental health issue to learn how to stand back up and walk tall again in their lives. Please follow us on all of our social platforms, our YouTube channel, and check out our Walking Tall movement at www.walkingtallmovement.com. Now, here's our show.
Welcome back to Walking Tall. If you were with us last week, we were so excited to talk about guilt and all the emotions it brings on. I know I learned a lot from both Todd and Dr. LaRosa, but Todd, if you don't mind, talk to us a little bit about last week, some thoughts you had walking away from the show and where we're headed this week.
Yeah, I thought it was an interesting show to discuss, what guilt is. I loved how Dr. LaRosa, gave us some definition of it and allowed, me, I really learned a lot. Just around, the scientific version of it and how it's linked to, depression and anxiety and how that can really affect you. And I think it's just something that, we need to pay attention more to, right? As we go through kind of our everyday life and what we're dealing with. And then looking back at we brought up the athleticism part of it or walking away from the game or being told you can't play sports anymore or some sort of career. And, what did you do things? Could you have done something different and things like that? So I really liked the show. I encourage people to go back and watch it or listen to it if you missed it.
Yeah, actually, you said something there that kind of struck me too. I never realized, if not for Dr. LaRosa's expertise last week and helping us learn where guilt may spawn from, I never considered it being linked to other mental health issues, if you will, right? I thought guilt was its own sentiment or emotion or feeling or issue or whatever we want to call it. But thinking about it now and listening back to last week's show, Dr. LaRosa, it makes a lot of sense, right? Like having being depressed would certainly lean into being guilty of things you may not even be guilty of, if you will. So yeah, talk to us a little bit more after hearing last week's show, thinking about it a little bit longer, what resonated with you, and is there anything you want to clarify for us and our listeners?
Well, I'm really glad that information resonated with you and got you to think twice about your own mental process, because guilt is a subjective term and it's going to affect everyone differently and uniquely. There is no scientific objective definition of guilt, but what matters is how each person perceives it and the impact on the daily life functioning that it has for each and every one of us. And if guilt, again, is excessive and irrational and it's interfering with our mental health, it is an honest sign that we need to get further evaluation and treatment. And so I'm really glad that could be a red flag some people can now take note of before it perhaps grows out of control and into something that they absolutely, are too overwhelmed to deal with.
Yeah, absolutely. Learning is one of the many benefits of this show and being a part of this team. So I hope as a listener, you're taking away just as much as Todd and I are, or even Dr. LaRosa herself may be learning from us or our guests.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we've kind of intended at the onset of Walking Tall, we made it clear to you as a listener and to ourselves that, we're not just focusing on one area of mental health. We are not just setting out to speak about trauma or PTSD or mass shootings or anything of the sort. We want to be all encompassing. And autism was certainly a part of our plan for this show. I think at the end of last week, we discussed celebrating what I called Autism Awareness Month. But as I said earlier, education being a part of this show, even in pre-production, Dr. LaRosa just educated me. Chris, it's not autism awareness, it's Autism Acceptance Month. So Dr. LaRosa, thanks for educating me and letting me know that while yes, we did intend today to celebrate Autism Acceptance Month, I think the three of us and even you as a listener would understand and recognize the last month in the United States with respect to mass shootings has been daunting. There have been a lot of events that have just rocked our nation, rocked the communities of which they've occurred, and sadly impacted the three of us. And we wanted to take time today, not to celebrate Autism Acceptance Month, but to discuss the recent occurrences throughout our country and how they've impacted us, some folks we know, and what we can do to ensure our mental health is in good order, because these events, unfortunately, have continued to occur and will continue to occur. So before we start talking about what's happened as of late, Dr. LaRosa, I wanted to give you an opportunity, because we did intend to celebrate Autism Acceptance Month, to just say a few things about autism, your work in the field, what you recognize, and what we're learning more about autism. Before we move on. And I want just one thing for our listeners to know: we fully intend to celebrate. We will have a full show to discuss the Autism Acceptance Month. It's just not right now. But before we get into today's show, Dr. LaRosa, please, if you don't want to say a few words, we'd love to hear what you have to say.
Oh, of course, of course. And I did not say it that harshly. I'm kidding.
No, I told you I'd get you to laugh.
There is there is awareness in the history of this terminology, absolutely, but it's sort of evolved to acceptance because, you know, in my mind and in what we have discussed, all people should walk tall for themselves and for others. People with autism and disabilities have walked tall for me. You know, there have been times when I was in my early 20s, I went to work. Sometimes we went to the bowling alley on Sundays, and I was in a bad mood or something bad happened to me. And I walked in and I had 12 to 15 people with disabilities run over to me and hug me like I was walking into some place like a celebrity, you know, and all I was their counselor, you know, there to support them and love them and help them through life, but they were helping me through life. So, you know, the concept of walking tall applies to all of us. However, whatever level of abled we are, I don't say disabled, I say we all have different levels of ability. So with great respect and regard for people on the autism spectrum, we wanted to have a show dedicated to them and to autism acceptance. You know, the numbers are continuing to rise. We're looking at 1 in 36, you know, some diagnoses cross-culturally are factoring into that number increasing over time. And we need to work to support these wonderful people and their families. There's a lot of stress on the families as well in trying to find answers and care for their children. There are long wait lists for people awaiting diagnosis and treatment. And we need to do better as a country in serving these people and their families. And that's been my lifelong mission. So of course, I'm very excited to talk further about it when we get there. And I have a whole list of wonderful people who will join us.
Yeah, thank you for that. You know, Todd and I both, as we've gotten to know you and learn more about autism, I can tell you, I certainly do, and I know Todd does as well, has a greater affection for folks with autism, and certainly your help in making us aware and accepting of those people has been nothing more than phenomenal. So thank you, Dr. LaRosa. And I want to just say I'm sorry that we're not able to get to the show we wanted to today, but we will certainly celebrate autism awareness and acceptance in short order. So thanks for allowing us to kind of pivot this week. I appreciate it significantly. But yeah, so we talked about the last month or thereabout in our country as it relates to mass shootings, and there have been a significant amount of them that have rocked our nation, the communities of which they occurred, us here on Walking Tall, and likely you as a listener. So I just wanted to start in Nashville. You know, if you haven't heard, I'm sure you have. There was a horrific event at the Covenant School, of which 6 innocent lives were lost. A killer walked into the school, taking 3 children, 3 adults. And I myself, while that was going on, was on spring break with my family in the Wisconsin Dells, trying to celebrate a little time away from my family. And as you can imagine, due to my experience, no different than yours, Todd, when these types of things occur, your phone starts to blow up. People try to check on you, to hear what you know, to get your opinion. things of that sort. So you and I started connecting back and forth and talking a little bit about that event and what that's doing to us individually and as a group. So yeah, if you want to talk just a little bit about how you were feeling as those circumstances were revealing themselves to us, and how that impacted you.
Yeah, I think, I mean, obviously, my prayers and strength and, continue to go out to those families and that not only that lost their children and their spouses and their friends, the direct impact, but also to the children and staff and law enforcement, first responders that were there. The initial impact when you hear that first gunshot, that there's danger, and that feeling of fear and anxiety and everything that comes about. Obviously you're transported there in going through that experience, that horrible experience. You're always transported right into the middle of that classroom or right into the middle of that bank or whatever that may be. And you're there and you're hearing it, you're smelling it, you're feeling the fear, you're wanting to eliminate. I know that's where I want to be able to stop the threat. And when I don't watch a lot of the news, I've kind of tuned that out as much as I can. And every once in a while I'll be brave and I'll get on there and try to see what's going on in the world. But you're right. We get text messages from our support groups of people that are caring about us, that are in the news piece. And I know when I first heard that, anytime, of course, obviously any loss of life is horrible. And when you're dealing with children, it's even worse. And, the situation in Uvalde in Texas, any of these school shootings, it's absolutely chaotic. And me having children, that are still in school, and Chris, yourself, and Vanetta, and, you instantly start thinking about, all right, what's the safety protocol? What are we doing? How are they safe? Like, what's going on? And you almost want to stand at the front door and check every single person that's going in. And unfortunately you can't. So, it's just really sad. That's the emotion of it, the mental part of it. You have nightmares again. It brings back all these feelings of loss and sorrow. And it's probably more just sad. And then I get pissed. I really get mad and angry. And the emotional kind of Molotov cocktail of it, where you're like, son of a bitch, like, why would you do that? And go take that, go out to a field and go do it yourself. Not that I want that, but don't hurt someone else if you just as a game. And then the rationalization part comes in. It's like, all right, well, were there any precursors to like what happened? Did someone know about it and didn't say anything? Was there a mental health piece? And I know, Chris, you're going to go into that in a little bit. Were there signs? Did somebody not say something? I shared something that Woody that we had on, he used in his support groups, and anytime he worked with community. It's a video that really tells tomorrow's story, and it's gripping, and it's a made up version of what's going to happen tomorrow if there's a shooting at a school. And it talks about police saying, yeah, we're probably going to hear that, well, there was signs, and we're probably going to hear that the person, did something on social and let something out. Nobody said anything. So we're probably going to hear a lot of those stories. And then, it's a mom saying, yeah, I knew something was off with that kid. And I told my daughter, in fact, I was going to tell my daughter to stay away from that child, but my daughter was one of the ones that was shot. And so it's a really, tearful, like gripping portrayal of what really goes on. And we need to be more brave as a society to stand up and say things, even if it means you might lose a friend. So I know we're going to get into that and everything, but my initial feedback was, it's just horrible.
Yeah, no, I feel the exact same way. I think you said it, Todd. Obviously any loss of life is rattling, especially when it's in that fashion, right? But when it's children and it's a school setting, it's just unacceptable in my opinion. As you said, we all have children and kids ourselves. But the thing I think for us as adults, and that becomes even more startling, is we all been in classrooms, we've all been in banks, we've all been in movie theaters, we've all been to parades, right? And when it comes to folks like yourself and me, Todd, who've been in these circumstances, Dr. LaRosa, how do we not put ourselves back in those situations, right? Like, Todd being in a concert, me being a parade, and having always been in classrooms and banks when these types of shootings occur, I could picture myself exactly in that classroom, knowing exactly what's occurring, how people are feeling and reacting. And that really impacts me at this point. So, we talked about triggers before. We talked a little bit about flashbacks. Like, what's the scientific side of some of these occurrences and what they do to folks like yourself or Todd or I, for that matter?
Well, first of all, I just like to say, whenever I see one of these tragic events, the first thing that comes to my mind is, dear God, rest their souls and pray for their families, and each and every time I see something like this, now going back to Sandy Hook, the emotional toll that it takes personally on me, and I'm sure there's many other extraordinarily empathetic people in this world who feel the same exact way, is not to take lightly. There are many, 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 many times where for several days after seeing something, all of these events have affected me in the same way. For several days, I'm experiencing deep sadness and anxiety, which I've mentioned on the show. I'm very in tune to my own emotions and my own potentials, for mental health to go awry. And, I've always been a little bit prone to depression. Everything's weigh heavily on me. I think heavily. I have a lot of empathy and a lot of concern for others. And sometimes that grows to be a lot, and so I think it's very hard. We're not equipped to see these kinds of things happening at all. Nevertheless, the frequency that they are occurring. So every other day, it just seems like we're turning around and we're seeing something else tragically happen to someone, and just recently I caught a glimpse of a young man after the Sweet 16 shooting in Alabama. And he was just a young man who was crying these big, strong guy, crying these big tears for his friend, that he wished he could have pulled him back. An interview with his little sister, whose party it was, about how her brother jumped to save her life, how she must feel for the rest of her life that at her own Sweet 16, her brother lost his life. And all I think about is the after effects and the aftermath of how all of these innocent people will feel, the loss of children, every single day. I say goodbye to my children, they wake up, they get my good morning hugs, they go off to school. The last thing a parent ever wants to think about is God forbid, something happens to them and I don't get to see them again. But that's the reality for some people. And it's devastating and heartbreaking. There are no other words to describe it. It's painful. And depression, anxiety, these things, they have a memory, for lack of a better way to explain this. But these things become ingrained and they become cumulative and they become more and more difficult to put in a can, if you will, and go on and live our lives. And we should never do that. We should never be hardened as a society, as a people, to look at these events and just put them in a can and go on with our lives. It's okay to feel the pain and suffering that we do for others. That's why we're human. That's what will make a difference. And I want to encourage people to stay connected to those feelings. Don't try to push them aside. Don't try to bury them. Your anxiety and your depression will only get worse as a result. And that's what people know how to do. How do you go on with your life? How can you take an hour out and just grieve for the people on TV that you see around you? Well, we have to make time in our lives to do this now because this is our reality.
Yeah. And, we're going to have a guest on next week who resides in Nashville. And while they weren't directly impacted by the event, they're a community member of that Nashville community and were impacted. And understandably so. Dr. LaRosa, you said it best. When these types of incidents occur, we have to take time, regardless of how directly or indirectly we were impacted, to acknowledge if we feel the need to grieve, to do so, to then rationalize with the circumstance and find our strength and our abilities to move on. I'm excited to hear next week. I won't let the cat out of the bag too soon. But yeah, next week's guest is phenomenal. Done a lot of great things in life, but certainly was impacted to a lesser degree than Todd and I by an event just simply in their community, not being present. But one thing before we kind of move on from what occurred in Nashville, Todd, you and I have talked a little bit offline about some safety measures within schools. And obviously the three of us have school age kids, mine being elementary, the two of yours being high school and college. But there was a safety measure, the school of which one of your children are trying to implement, Todd, that you weren't necessarily in favor of. And I understand why. But it's just another factor to consider when we're sending our children to school nowadays. So if you don't mind, you want to just talk real briefly about what was trying to occur and how you felt and what we're doing, potentially to combat that.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up, Chris, and, thank you, because it is really important. I think, I'm going to touch on something super fast. After an event of such tragedy, we do as a society, and whether you're directly impacted through that traumatic event or indirectly, we're seeing it on the news. And in our next week's guest, he was somewhat of a hybrid between directly and indirectly affected. But how do you go back to a bank? How do you go into a movie theater? How do you, and I think that's part of some of the things that we've touched on before with just identifying where you're at, and it's okay as parents to talk to your kids about, hey, where are you going? Oh, you're going to be going to a concert, or, hey, you're going to be going to a party or out to a park. Hey, let's talk about safety really quick. I think it's okay to do that and just say, hey, just identify some areas that where your exit points are. Make sure that if something were to happen to your left, you know what you're doing to your right. If something happens to your right, you know what you're doing to your left. And what do you do in a situation where there's gunfire or an explosion or a tornado or some sort of catastrophe? What do you do? How do you contact us? Where do we go to find you? How do you find us in a tragedy? Those are okay things to talk about. I know, we don't want to scare our kids, but our kids are so smart now. And they're seeing these things on technology before we as parents are even seeing it. They're getting notifications of it. When Kathy and I, we were in that shooting in Vegas, our kids got a notification from one of their friends that mom and dad are there. These kids are smart enough to be able to handle us having a safety talk with them. So now going into this conversation about what our school systems are doing, and I know it's happening in California and other places. I've talked to some friends, I think even up in your area in New York, Vanetta, is a lot of these now districts are trying to come up with safety protocols to not only arm and secure the outside perimeter of the schools, which I think are great, locking doors, having triggers, alarm systems that go off in the administrative offices that, hey, the building B's back door has been breached, sort of thing. And they've got all these camera systems. If you have the money enough in the systems that they're building all these out, I know a lot of those companies that are securing our children's schools, are really busy now, with all these shootings. But one of the things that really struck me is one of the safety quote unquote features that has been implemented is, and it's also a tool to get kids to focus more in class, is here they're actually requiring children or kids, whether it's middle school, elementary, or the high school kids, to check their phone in when they enter the classroom and put it in some sort of box that's locked up, or they're putting it into some sort of sleeved out, little compartment deal that's behind the teacher's desk. And essentially they're making the kids check their phones in and be away from their technology. And if they have to go to the restroom, they're not able to take their phones. So essentially what you have is now classroom full of kids that the teacher gets to talk to, and they're without their technology. And I understand the beneficial part of some of that, but God forbid you have a mass tragedy that happens. God forbid a shooter comes in and starts, pulling that trigger. What's going to happen? You're going to have 30 kids in a classroom scrambling right to that box, because what is the phone to our adolescent kids or even our younger kids? It's safety. Number one, that's their only outsource. That's their line of communication. That's part of their fabric now. It's the way our society has built them and created them. But you're going to have 30 kids running to that box to break the box to grab their phone. And you know as well as I know, Chris, because we've seen it firsthand, those seconds, those milliseconds could end up meaning lives. So here we are as a society, and I know that everybody's trying to do their best and they're trying to make these safety protocols, make sure it's all safe. But I think you're kind of forgetting to maybe even talk to some of the people that have been in those situations and get a firsthand perspective on a civilian standpoint on what is going to happen, because it makes zero sense to me. And I actually had a conversation with somebody that thought they were really cool because they went and designed their own box to put all their kids' phones in, and they thought it was really neat. And I was like, what do you think's going to happen? That box is going to get broken. And now you're going to be in the first 30 seconds where things have already probably exploded. And now you're going to be trying to get people and those kids following the guidelines that they should be following right away. And Chris, you've got a story that you're about to bring up in that piggybacks off that technology. So I don't think it's a good rule to have. I think the kids, our teachers should just have the opportunity to say, put your phone away, put it in your bag. I will not. I'm telling you right now, my kids will not be without their phone, because I've seen it and I need to be in constant contact with them 24/7.
No, that's a really it's a really great insight, Todd. Thank you for sharing with us. I think aside from the emotional baggage that these events bring to us, the three of us, Todd and I particularly, and obviously Dr. LaRosa, hearing firsthand our experiences and living through us in those events. But, it also brings on conversations like this of logistics. And I think the three of us have had offline talks, and we are planning a show to bring topics like this to the forefront, to bring on some additional experts who can help all of us, frankly, understand and perceive things differently. I will say, the intent of the cell phone box is great. I understand it. I'm distracted by my cell phone all the time, right? I would love to have a little box to put that thing in. And I'm sure teachers would love it if 15 students would throw their phones in a box and actually paid attention to their reading and writing and arithmetic, if those are even the subjects anymore. But we are planning a show to talk about these logistics and how we can, as a unit, help guide all of us, frankly, through some of these more unimaginable experiences and how to think ahead. I think that is a positive outcome of our experiences and Walking Tall. But moving on from Nashville, obviously we've had some significant incidents in Louisville just immediately after. And once again, simply shook the three of us and our nation. And that was at the Old National Bank when an employee opened fire and killing a significant amount of people there. And that's a different circumstance, because now from my perspective, I'm thinking, gosh, this person, he worked there. He knew the bank. He knew the employees. He had the ins and outs of the facilities, unlike other incidents. And, sadly, as the news often does, it digs deeper and finds things that, may not be pertinent to the circumstance or the event. But recently, a manifesto came out of which the media is reporting this individual who committed the acts in Louisville at the bank was attempting to prove a point. And that point was because he himself allegedly had mental health issues. then went on to buy a gun. He wanted to prove how easy it was for folks with mental health issues to get guns. And, that to me, once again, is just so saddening, and just breaks my heart to just know what those folks were experiencing in that bank that day. And the city of Louisville having, 2 mass shootings within a short amount of time, the next one being at a park where people were just having a nice evening. It's just heart-wrenching to hear. But yeah, Dr. LaRosa, if you don't want to talk to us a little bit about, how you've been perceiving the recent occurrences in our nation, Louisville particularly, having known, having the killer, having known the environment and the people which unfortunately they were attacking. It's just devastating.
Well, first I want to say again, these things may inadvertently give the negative stigma a little bit back to people with mental health issues. That is not what we at all want to do. This is a self-prescribed diagnosed situation. We have no idea to what extent any of this is true, and we don't know what, if any, diagnosis exists. And without going into extraordinary detail, there's a low percentage of pure psychopaths among us, those people that don't have a conscience, that will plan something to this degree with no emotion or forethought for anybody that they are devastating in plain language. But aside from that particular mental health situation, we must make it clear that people with your standard variety of mental health issue are not the type of people to go out and commit a mass shooting. So we have to understand that there are so many potential factors of what might go wrong with a person to lead them down such a dark and devastating path. But we don't want to highlight people who are committing these crimes right now. That's never going to be our intention. We talk a lot behind the scenes about how that is exactly what we will not do. So, my mind always privately goes to what could have been wrong, what could be the diagnosis, what could be the history, what could be the precursors, what could people have noticed or done or said. And I think that we are being really smart and targeted by focusing on those experts amongst us, those people that we know that will come on and talk about signs and things to look for in a society, a different way of being more, hyper vigilant, knowing what to do when you do suspect something. I think that those answers and those keys that we can present to society may help in that regard. As far as the whys or, how people get so desperate and get to this point, we will never know. All we can do is hope that people can be more in tune to their mental health needs and get the help and treatment along the way that they can, and hope it doesn't get so out of control that these things happen, if that's even the reason at all that any of this has happened. We don't know. There could be brain injury, there could be drug or substance use, there could be such severe mental illness that goes undiagnosed and untreated, that it leads to people living in delusional and alternate universes where they don't even know what they're doing or they do, so there's just a lot there to try to pick apart. All I know is that it does affect our kids. It does affect us. They see it, they hear it, whether we keep the TV on or off. My son, I have one in middle and one in high school. They're always coming home saying, if we have a lockdown, this is what I would do. If we had a shooter, this is what I would do. I would jump out the window and run as fast as I could. They think about it. It's at the forefront of their minds. And certainly that's going to be adding to their anxiety. And, kids express anxiety much differently than adults do. It could look like ADHD. Kids may not be focused in the classroom. Parents, if teachers are calling you and saying your child is just not focused in the classroom, they just can't pay attention, they can't finish their work, they can't find their homework, they don't know what page to turn to, they can't complete assignments, understand that could be anxiety, because that is one of the ways that it manifests in children. They could be more angry, they could be more irritable, there could be a whole bunch of things going on that will signify anxiety or depression in kids that looks differently than the way that it does in adults. These things can build up on, in their minds and affect their lives on a daily basis very easily, because this is heavy, heavy stuff. Think about how it hurts us and weighs so heavily upon us. They're children, they're not equipped to deal with this sort of societal violence.
Yeah, no, you said two things there that really struck a chord with me. One of comfort, right? That they're, I think you used the term psychopath, that from a mental perspective, the diagnosis would not be so great amongst the general population of which you think folks would be able to commit such violent acts. That's comforting in one. And two, I think most importantly, and another topic that we've talked about offline that we certainly plan to address via Walking Tall is the media coverage of these types of events, right? Without saying too much, I have a really bone to pick. I have a big bone to pick, I guess, if that's the right term, with the media and their coverage and how they even approached my circumstance on the 4th of July last summer. And we're going to get to that, right? And Todd, you've had significant media experience due to your event now having, been 5 going on 6 years past, and your story being nationally known. But yeah, as a group, Walking Tall, we certainly have plans to address media coverage of these events, how they impact us as people, how they impact you as a listener, and how, unfortunately, they may help, expedite these types of events occurring more often, which is certainly something we want to shy away from. But yeah, so moving off Louisville, the last unfortunate event that's happened as of late was Daleville, Alabama. And if you're not in tune with us on social media and Walking Tall, I highly encourage you to do so, because one of our intents and initiatives is when these events occur, we strive to reach out to people within those communities. We network, we recruit, we work as hard as we can, as fast as we can, to find people inside those communities, to let people know that we're there for them. And Daleville, Alabama is no different. I've actually made some resources now in Daleville, and hopefully we're going to have an opportunity to speak with some people, provide them some materials, give them some of our stickers, whatever the course may be, just to let them know we're there for them and they're not alone. But yeah, Dr. LaRosa, I'll turn it to you again. You've talked significantly about, your strong sense of empathy and seeing the young man on the news, going back to the media coverage once again of these events. That young man had no business being interviewed at that point, and he was at his worst moment. Unfortunately, you got to see him in that circumstance. So talk a little bit about, how that made you feel, but also, some things, folks who have experienced things like mass shootings that get put on the news, what are some things they should be keen on as well?
You've been through it, both of you, so nobody could talk to this better than you, and how you felt in the aftermath of the situations and the mass shootings that you went through. Imagine at that point in time, shortly thereafter, somebody coming up to you for a statement or an interview on TV. You're not mentally there. I'm going to let you interject, Todd.
Yeah, no, it happened. Todd,
No.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I wasn't trying to interject. I was listening to you.
Yeah. I was saying nobody can speak to that particular point more clearly than either of you. So
Todd, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Todd.
I'll rejoin.
Yeah, no, I know, in my situation, I was contacted by multiple media outlets, hours after the event had taken place. It's probably about that 6th hour, I guess, because there wasn't any communication going, back and forth. Everything was we were still basically under attack, and everybody's from law enforcement, first responders, civilians on the ground, in Las Vegas. So it was about 6 hours. I ended up getting contacted by multiple media outlets all the way up until, Kathy and I got home, back to Dallas, and I still was getting contacted. You land and I'm getting our bags, and there's, 4 or 5 cameras, people being interviewed because they knew, coming back. And so, of course, people had already seen my story. They knew that I was there. And so, you're getting interviewed right off the bat. And you can't really think, you're trying to recount what happened, but you don't really know what happened because you're playing it over in bits and pieces and it's still fresh, but you're trying to process what the heck just happened to you.
Mhm.
And what you've seen on TV, or like I referenced before, with unfortunately the tragedy in New York on 9/11, and just that overwhelming, like you're sitting on the bed going, oh my God, like this is really happening. This is not a movie. This is happening to those poor people. And now it did. And so I know that media has their, and we're going to get into this later. I know that media has their job to report, but I think they take it too far at times. And I think that people, if, again, this goes to preparation, right? On knowing what you're going to do. First of all, like we've mentioned before, run, hide, fight if you have to. If you're going to fight, number one, you better fight with all intent to stop and do what you can until you've either had to been stopped or that person is eliminated, in my opinion. But the aftermath of that, you need to process that, and you need to separate. You need to be able to think about what just happened and grieve. And the support systems that we've seen, and what Chris and you've been so active online trying to push people to just understand that they're not alone. And we've mentioned this, the first responders in Nashville, the people in that community, the person we're going to have on next week, and the family that, he was indirectly, now he's somewhat directly attached to, especially on the emotional side. Don't give up on them. This is not going to be something they're going to forget. They're just not. And you need to make sure that with these things that are happening, those first responders that were on scene, those teachers, the staff, the school district, the community, the owners of coffee shops and things like that are seeing all these, they're all affected. So for you to reach out and just say, hey, how you doing? Like, what's going on? That might, in that one moment, offer someone the opportunity to really unload their grief.
Yeah.
They may just start talking to you because all of a sudden your voice is soothing and you're comforting, and you've kind of hit them up a couple of times, right, Chris?
No, you're the one with the soothing voice on the show, Todd, not me.
Oh, geez. No. I'm going to get my guitar out and start singing. No,
but it's so funny.
Yeah.
You alluded to a few things, and, obviously coming off the plane and seeing those cameras had to be startling for you. I often tell in my story, it wasn't but 2 hours after the killer opened fire that several employees at the Park District received an email from a major news outlet. Now, mind you, it's not but 2 hours after. I'm still on site trying to work with law enforcement to rescue staff sheltering in place. There are still people with wounds meandering about town. There is still confusion and chaos everywhere. And yet the media is already working a story. And of course, nobody responded to that outlet. And we got another email about 3 hours after. So within 5 hours, the killer was still on the loose. And there was two messages from the media asking for people just to come give statements in an interview. Frankly, none of us were in any state to give any coherent interview, frankly. And like you said, Todd, they do have a job, and I totally respect and understand it. I just wish they would report on more positive things like Walking Tall, frankly. I think now that we have a platform of which we're trying to promote good into the world based on our experiences, that's the story I wish national media would pick up on, not the mass shooting. And then one more quick story, and then we'll move on. But when the incidents in California occurred, literally it was like January 16th when we started coming up with the plans for Walking Tall. A killer went on the loose in California and shot up a few establishments. And there was this young man by the name of Brandon Say. Now, his name will stick with me forever. I've never spoken to the man. I would love to meet him. I would love for him to come on the show, frankly. But if you remember, Todd, he was the one, and Dr. LaRosa, he was the one who wrestled the gun out of the killer's arms, and was a hero in his own right. But 5-6 hours after he had done such a heroic act, he was on the national news being interviewed by every outlet. And I will tell you with certainty, I recognized traumatized signs that I saw in myself now looking back. And, that poor young man had no business. He needed a hug. He didn't need an interview, frankly. And
that's what I was going to say before when I started this, before I turned it back over to you. When I saw that young man through the TV, I just wanted to give him a hug. I just wanted to tell that person, stop asking him questions. It's okay for people to, if they're approached by the media, God forbid, if they're, in a situation like that, that they say, respectfully, I can't do this right now. It's okay. I know they're powerful, the media, and people may feel as if they can't say no, that it's their duty to report, that they're obligated, but people have to take care of themselves first. And it's okay to say, I just can't do this right now. I'm not in a good mental state. I just can't do it. And, the one thing the media would be so helpful with would be to advertise and provide national resources to ensure that the family, to put it out there that, hey, this family or these people involved could use the local support of a counseling center or a therapist or someone that's willing to reach out to them. I know there's a lot of free resources out there, but there's also a lot of therapists that would jump into action if they just had the pathway to do it, if they just had, an easier connection to do it. So, there are ways that, potentially the media can help with these circumstances. And again, we're not trying to bash the media. They have a duty to report, and they, a lot of them do a tactful job with very difficult material. Quite frankly, there's no good way to present some of these horrible things that happen. But if they could have some training and just understand what a trauma looks like afterwards, and you don't want to interview someone in that state. You don't, because they don't know what they're saying. They don't know how they're reacting at that point. And nobody knows the negative after effects that an interview like that could have on someone. So it's really best for everyone to give some space and time to grieve in those circumstances.
Yeah,
I think.
And go ahead, Todd.
Just really quick. I think too, that's such a great point, Dr. LaRosa. And I think too, on a community standpoint, your corporations, your business owners, your managers of sports and athletic, when you're in a community like, unfortunately, like Nashville, or even what happened, in California or anywhere where you're at, I think it's okay now. And we need to get to this point where owners of businesses or HR departments are calling team meetings after an event like that happens in Louisville and saying, okay, obviously our community was rocked. We were hit hard. This, we're in the news. This unfortunately happened. This is tragedy. How's everybody feeling? Open that door up. You don't, when I know like at your situation, Chris, I mean, working for city government, a lot of times you have resources. Sometimes in private businesses, you don't. And then you're told to like, just go about your day. And I get it. You need production. You need your workers to work and build the products, whether it's marketing or product design or whatever. We need people to stay focused. But I think it's okay now for you to take 30 minutes out and say, hey, team meeting, everybody. Like, obviously our nation was rocked here in Nashville. We lost some, innocent souls. How's everybody feeling about this? Like an open forum. And listen, if you need to talk, let's talk. If you need some time, let's build some time. And I think we need that because workers aren't going to be productive if our mental health is all messed up. But that's a sign of walking tall too, as a company, right? Yeah. If you're going against the grain and you're going against the old ways of get over it mentality, and you're actually opening up the opportunity to show empathy and show grace and show compassion. I lean on my faith. I've mentioned that multiple times. I'm deeply connected to that, and it's been my strength. But I really feel like there's an opportunity for business owners and our corporate society to change. And it needs to start in athletics too, Chris. What if all of a sudden you're having a bad day. How many times did you go into your manager's office and say, "Hey coach, like I'm really having a tough time, man. I broke up with my whatever." Like he'd be like, I don't really care. Get out of my office. You're wasting
Get on
my
the mound,
time.
buddy.
Yeah, it needs to change though, because we
Yeah.
have too much going on, and media is such a direct result of that. And again, they have to do their job. We need to stay informed with what's going on. They play a very important role in keeping us safe as well, right?
Yeah.
Around our world. But I think just people need to focus a little bit more on walking tall for others.
Yeah, no, it's actually it's a great segue into the last little portion of today's show, which we were going to talk about. I alluded to at the onset, kicking off today's discussion about an incident in Highland Park. And for those listeners that don't know, we had another circumstance on April 4th, just a few weeks ago, where the high school, because of the Nashville incident, coupled with the experience in Highland Park on the 4th of July, the students at the local high school had planned a peaceful protest to gun violence on April 4th. They were going to walk out of the high school at 10:14 a.m., which is the exact time the killer rang shots at our experience in Highland Park at the parade. And they were going to have a peaceful protest and go back in their classes. Okay. So it occurs, 10:14 happens. Now, mind you, at this point, we're in our leadership meeting. All of our directors on every Tuesday have a meeting. So there's 10 or 11 of us in the room. And we're going about our business. And I get a text message. Todd, to your point earlier about students communicating with their parents and the swiftness, if you will, at which this communication can and does occur, this is a great example. So it's about 10:30 or thereabout on a Tuesday morning, April 4th. I'm in my meeting. I get a text message from an employee. The employee notifies me that, "Hey, Chris, I want to let you know my daughter just texted me from the high school. They're in a hard lockdown." Now, for those of you that don't know, a hard lockdown means there's activity going on. There's significant threat of danger. So I immediately shoot up out of my chair. I walk to my boss. I show him my phone. I showed him my phone because I didn't want to alert and alarm the others in the room that something was going on. I didn't know the circumstance. I wanted just to keep it close to my chest at that time. I showed him my phone. I walked out of the room and I started securing our building. Now, because it was a community government facility at the school, once that school goes into a lockdown, we have to act as well. So we go into what's called a soft lockdown. Difference being a hard lockdown is nobody in or out and you're sheltering in place. Soft lockdown, you can allow people in your facilities and whatnot, but you have to do identification checks. You have to ask a certain set of questions, etc. So we're meandering about the facility, going into soft lockdown protocol. We're assigning, and I'm assigning people to every door. We're giving them instructions of what to do, so on and so forth. And as you can imagine, none of us really knew what was going on at the time. Of course, we're thinking the worst. So as the facility is starting to secure, I reconnect with my supervisor. He informs me, yes, in fact, he did get a message only after I informed him. So there again, Todd, to your point, the student in the school was able to communicate faster to their mother, who was then able to communicate faster to me than even our staff was able to be communicated with via the city. Not the city's fault. It's just the way the world works nowadays. And so locking up a phone, who knows what detriments that could have brought. So nevertheless, we go into our soft lockdown protocol, securing the facilities. I'm now getting text messages about the circumstance, what they believe the perpetrators of the scene are wearing, things of that sort, because it's now known that there seems to have been gun threats at the high school, and these kids are now on the streets. So now the whole town is locking down again, right? Fast forward 45 minutes later or thereabout, it comes to be that the assailants, the kids, whomever, whatever you want to call them at this point, were captured. Okay. And so our lockdown was lifted. After the lockdown was lifted, I went into my office and I had a panic attack. It was a mini one, thankfully, at that point. But I simply could not collect myself. I sat in my chair and I just sobbed. And Todd, you've talked about headaches. I started getting that pulsing headache again. It was almost like a blunt object was just being stabbed in my head over and over and over. So fortunately, a coworker had heard, what was going on in my office, and she came in and consoled me as best as she could. And I just kind of collected my stuff and left. I just went home for the day. I just had my fill. It just put me back in that place of where I was on July 4th. It brought back all those emotions, all those flashbacks, triggers, etc. It put me back in that place, simply by my current experience. So I got home that day and did my best to disengage from the news and whatnot, but I had 2 more panic attacks that same day. Todd, I think I talked to you at some point and just let you know I was okay, but not okay, if you will. And the third being the worst of all. I couldn't breathe, I couldn't talk, I had headaches, I wanted nothing but to just, again, lay in the fetal position on my couch. That was simply what I felt most safe doing. So I did that for quite a little bit. And then Dr. Lou called, my angel, and she talked me down a little bit and worked me through some breathing exercises and some energy releases. She has me stand up against a door frame, if you've ever done this, and just push a door frame as hard as you possibly can to just release some of that negative energy. I mean, I'm a strong guy, but I can't move a door. Todd, you're even stronger and you can't move a door. But yeah, so, she was just, she was just so needed and so available for me that day. Fortunately, nobody was injured. News reports are that 5 individuals were captured or investigated or arrested or whatever the case may be. But there again, it sent the town of Highland Park into an extreme tizzy. Many people are now re-traumatized. PTSD triggers and things of that sort are prevalent once again. And the other thing that I will just say before I let you guys talk a little bit before I kind of tell the culmination of this story, is that now, what I'm recognizing, and understandably so and rightfully so, a community like Highland Park is ultra sensitive. So now, no matter what circumstance occurs, I could just envision these types of situations progressing and occurring on a continual basis. And it's understandable, but it's also concerning because the mental harm these types of environments and events do, regardless of whether they're warranted or not, is significant, is extremely significant. So yeah, Dr. LaRosa or Todd, I don't even know who to turn it to after this. Yeah, I'll talk a little bit more, but the last thing I'll say, is due to that circumstance on April 4th, my triggers, my PTSD, whatever you want to call it, was at an all-time high. I got 5 hours of sleep in 3 nights, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, 5 collective hours of sleep. I was angry, I was emotional, I was irrational, and I just wasn't myself, frankly. And it's unacceptable to me not to be myself. And I'll talk to you guys and listeners a little bit more about what I'm doing about that. But yeah, Todd or Dr. LaRosa, whichever one feels comfortable, have at it.
I just want to say really quick that, I'm incredibly sorry that you had to go through all that. We talked a lot about triggers. We talked a lot about what they can do to your body and to your brain. Your body and your brain are reliving that circumstance, and that trauma comes right back up. And, there's a memory, like I said earlier, you felt the way that you did on that day. And these things are stimuli that evoked very similar responses and trauma in you. And it's very natural what you experienced and what you went through. And, Lou sounds positively amazing. I really hope we meet her.
She's going to be a guest soon. We're going to get her on. Yeah.
But, and for communities, like you said, particularly vulnerable after living through the types of things that some of these poor communities have gone through, that's where I would hope to see a local representative, a town mayor. That's where I would love to see a group of people locally coming together and offering support for a community on a continual basis. These things are more needed. They really are. People have to rebuild, they have to regain, and more work to do that is really called upon from people that can make a difference at a local community level. I think that's just going to be so important to heal one community at a time through all this tragedy.
Yeah, no, well said. I think too, coming from like the individual standpoint, you've got a city now that's been hit twice, and not Fortunately, this latest incident resulted in no violence and no harm physically, but the mental side of that, like you said, Chris, has rocked and shaken that whole entire community of Highland Park itself, let alone all the other things that are happening where now add, Chicago or Nashville and Louisville and all these others onto it. I think it's just really important, now being 5.5+ years out from my tragedy, I've learned some techniques through my therapist, through my support to separate, right? Completely separate. And when this happens, like you were you did the right thing. You were having this breakdown. You needed to get away, totally acceptable. Get away from that moment, break the routine of it up, and you need to really work on finding what's very peaceful to you in your mind and your heart and your soul. Whether it's go to church and relax and pray, whether it's go out and grab a fishing pole and go to a lake, whether it's go, just take a nice drive and put some soothing music on, or maybe sometimes it's watching a funny movie or something and just getting away and breaking from reality, whatever that is, right? Step Brothers, by the way, that's always a good one.
I will say, Todd, after the 4th, I think I may have binge watched Impractical Jokers for about 7 million episodes, right? Because exactly that. I didn't want to watch the news. I didn't want to watch violence. Literally from like July 5th to like August 31st or whatever. Like I only watched Impractical Jokers.
Yeah.
I
watch Friends. Nick at Night, baby. Friends. It's awesome. Love it.
Yeah. So, as April 4th and those panic attacks, came to me and those, days went on and I didn't have any sleep. I just couldn't sleep. It wasn't if I didn't want to, like I just couldn't. Right. So I ended up taking the Friday of that week off just to try and get some sleep. And I had a physical scheduled with my physical doctor on the Monday just to make sure I was okay. Right. And, we had some conversations about my experience on the 4th and what I just had recently experienced that same week. And we had a really, man-to-man, heart-to-heart talk about what I was going through and some of the tools that I could consider to help myself. And so, in the spirit of being vulnerable, I'll just say, the doctor prescribed to me anti-anxiety medicine and an antidepressant. Now I want to say with certainty that I by no way, shape, or form are judging anybody. I understand the need for medicine. I value its purpose and its place. But I've never in my entire life, as a matter of fact, I turned 41 today. But in my 41 years of life, I have not needed medicine of that nature. And that's not to say that, at some point in my life, I may not need it. But I'm just at a place right now in my life where I don't want to take it. I want to pursue other avenues to work on myself. And so, as the conversation with my doctor turned from prescriptions and medicines to actually things I can do tangibly for myself, we had a conversation about FMLA leave. And, we had discussed what that looked like for me, what type of plan I could put in place to better myself. And the very next day, I went into my employer and I took a leave of absence. And now I have a plan in place of which I'm going to be working on both my physical and mental health as best as possible to see if I can't get myself back as close to the person I was on July 3rd as possible. So I have a plan in place with Dr. Lou. We have therapy sessions scheduled for the next, significant amount of time. I've been going to the gym every morning. I've taken some time for myself. I've taken some naps. I've had some lunches with some friends and family members. And I'm actually getting away this weekend as well. So Yeah. As hard as it was to go to my team to let them know I was really struggling and the week that I had was just not acceptable for me as a person and how I want to live my life moving forward, that I needed to take this step. I needed to walk tall for myself. But I knew in my heart of hearts, by doing that, I was also walking tall for others. And my hope in doing so and taking this leave, from work for the short amount of time is that others, whether it's at my place of employment or others listening to this show, or frankly, others that we may know that taking this step for yourself is okay. And in fact, I feel stronger for doing it than I did by going to work every day. So that's where I'm at right now. Unfortunately, April 4th put me into a tizzy, but now I have a plan and I have a support system in both Todd and Dr. LaRosa and the others in my inner circle. And I couldn't be any more grateful. And the last thing I'll say before, giving you guys an opportunity is, my employer has been nothing but supportive, and I can't thank them enough for the amount of time they've provided and the amount of grace they've given and the amount of support they've shown me and our entire community in Highland Park and our entire organization at the Park District for that matter. And I couldn't be more grateful because I need it. I just simply need it. Walking tall. Exactly that. So, Todd, as we start to wrap up this show, talk a little bit about what we've heard today, how you're feeling now that we've had this discussion. And, I'm excited to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, first of all, again, like I mentioned in the beginning, my heart and soul and prayers and strength go out to everybody affected indirectly or directly. And it's not easy. And, even those, our parent, us as parents, and we're worried about our kids' safety. I think just having those conversations in today's society and making sure that our kids know what to do in a tragic situation, making sure that we know what to do in a tragic situation, and the aftermath, and making sure that if God forbid something happens, that it's okay to be vulnerable, and it's okay to also reach out to those that were affected. It's not a weak thing. It's in fact, it's very strong. It's very courageous. It's very brave for you to cry with somebody and offer a helping hand. And it's exactly what your work did for you, Chris. And it's what we've been doing together, as a support group. But I'd like to see more, like Dr. LaRosa said, just more of our society, especially on the upper levels with corporate America and what we're doing to pay more attention to our feelings, because they really do matter. And so this was a great show. I was a little worried about just hearing all the details of things, but I feel really, really comfortable and strong. And hopefully people got a nice lesson out of this.
Well, Todd, you should feel strong because you are.
Oh, geez. I'm strong.
I didn't mean that. Certainly you're physically strong, but that's not what I meant. Dr. LaRosa, as we kind of recap and wrap up this show, what kind of thoughts are entering your head before we tease next week?
Well, I'm just so proud to know both of you. And, the way that you make yourselves and allow yourselves to be vulnerable for the sake of other people is such a great gift. And I say this a lot. Too many people are worried about a perception of perfection. They're afraid that if they show any signs of what they perceive as weakness, that people will hold it against them. It's a tough world out there, in jobs and in life. People are, always trying to get the one up. And, unfortunately, there are some people out there that don't carry the level of empathy that we wish that they did. And people are prone to sheltering themselves and working through it and having a tough veneer, but all the while suffering and breaking down on the inside. And we're all doing the right thing here by saying, hey, we need to take a step back, and we need to do this for ourselves, for others at this particular time in life. And you have had such great insight into your needs, and you've been able to do that. And Todd, through your faith and through the time that you've spent in therapy, have done the same. And, I certainly try to do the same for myself. I've had a little bit more of a challenge doing that, being a business owner and having others rely on me. It's been really hard for me to take time away. But there have been times in my life where, when my best friend died a couple of years ago and my dad died, I just need to take a day. I just need to go sit by the water. I just need to think, and when I was 5 years old, I remember I was going through something tough at the time. And I remember sitting on the side of my house, and I don't know how long I was there. My mother couldn't find me. And she came and said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I just need to think. I just need to think." And, that's my way of, kind of knowing that I need to give myself that time. So we all learn to deal with our minds and the way that we all process information. It's so individual, and it's a good getting to know you segment, getting to know your brain, getting to know what it needs, and knowing how to actually institute a plan to give it what it needs, which is exactly what you've done, so that takes a lot of insight, a lot of self-awareness, a lot of work, and it just should be understood.
It is, I'll admit it's work, listen, it's easy to stay in your routine and just go to work every day and punch a clock and do the job and come home, right? Like it is, but as I sit back and I think about this conversation and, Dr. LaRosa, you just said, I just need to think, right? Like that resonated so significantly with me because, I certainly want those in Nashville, those in Louisville, and those in Daleville as of late to know that we're thinking of them and we're here for them. And if you as a listener know someone in any of those communities that needs a resource or needs to speak with somebody who has like experiences, please put them in touch with us. We have so many initiatives via Walking Tall, but as of late with the recent experiences, we want to just be a resource. And that's one of our main goals here. So whether it's hopping on a plane to get to Louisville or Nashville or Daleville or having a conversation, we're here to do that and essentially walk tall as a nation for those that need it most in their time of need. So
can I just say one more quick thing?
Of course.
For everyone out there, turn up the empathy dial. It's okay. It's not just the mass shootings. It's not a little boy was just shot, recently for ringing the wrong doorbell, a little girl for her basketball rolling up on someone's yard. She and her father were shot. Our society, there's a lot of cruel things that are going on out there. And, the media does highlight those things. I don't know of as many kind things that are happening out there. I don't know. Do these things need to be shared more? I think so.
Sure.
The hard things, the things that exist out there that are breaking our hearts on a daily basis, once again, let's not be hardened to them. Let's stop and think and listen and let's feel for others and let's keep that going.
Yeah, no, you said something as I want to highlight next week's guest, Dr. LaRosa, turn up the empathy dial, right? And what I'll say is next week's guest, Kyle Thousand, he has his empathy dial turned max, right? And somebody with his lived experiences and his education and his network and resources certainly doesn't have to have that empathy dial turned all the way up. And there's a lot of people in his place that don't. But that's why we're even more fortunate to have Kyle Thousand joining us next week. And if you don't know, Kyle Thousand is the I don't want to get it wrong. He's the managing director of baseball for Milk and Honey, which is an agency representing the nation's top entertainment and sports talent. But prior to Milk and Honey, he was at Rock Nation as the managing director of baseball, working with Jay-Z. Before that, he was at Excel Sports Management, working with Casey Close and Derek Jeter. So he has a lot of life experiences to give and conversation to provide. But as we also said at the onset of today's show, he's a Nashville resident, and he was impacted to a degree about the events in Nashville a few weeks ago. So we can't wait to hear his take on that as well. So tune in next week as we welcome Kyle Thousand from Milk and Honey on the Walking Tall Movement podcast. And before we sign off, we got one more thing to say, and that's walk tall.
Walk tall.
Walk tall, everybody.
Have a great week. Walk tall, everyone.
We'd like to thank our sponsor, The Balance Project. Check them out at www.thebalance-project.org. Thank you so much for being a proud supporter of the Walking Tall movement.